We Lutherans love grace. We rejoice in the belief that God has saved us by God's own action. Salvation is a gift, not earned by our actions, but solely given by God because God loves us. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. This is grace. But when we Lutherans start to talk about the law, especially Old Testament law, we shudder and think of works righteousness. Obeying God's law in order to receive the reward of God's mercy, or doing good deeds in order to earn salvation. And we say, no, salvation isn't about good works. And yet, we are reminded by Old Testament and by Jesus himself that life is found in obedience to the law. Deuteronomy tells us it's a choice. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life, Moses says, so that you and your descendants may live. Deuteronomy 30:29. Now, we certainly make mistakes, and thank God Jesus erased our punishment for this. But we can choose to live by God's law. This is the law of love. Love for the one and only God, and love for others. Moses reminds the people of how this law is life. He says the law is there for the people's own well-being. In other words, obedience to the law is for the good of society, for fairness, healthy living, and building supportive, positive, life-giving relationships. Obedience to the law will prosper the people because that's what love does. It plants and nurtures. It builds and expands. It flourishes and enlivens life. Now, of course, as we know the story, the Israelites didn't obey God's law and they suffered for it. 40 years of wilderness walking, for example. But this Sunday we hear Moses reminding the Israelite people on the cusp of their entry into the promised land that the law is still there for them. This prosperous life as God intended is theirs for the choosing. And what's marvelous to me is Moses' confidence in the people's ability to choose life. Here, towards the end of the story in chapter 30, Moses says, when you obey. The Jewish Bible actually translates this verse 10 as, since you will be heeding the Lord your God. You see, this is God's promise too, that the people won't fail. Moses tells them, you shall keep the commandment of God. How? Well, God will circumcise your heart so that you will love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. You see, the word that holds God's commandments and calls us to follow is so close to you that it's in your mouth. It's so real that your hearts burn with it. Now, as ever, we need to yearn for God's law, this law of love, the law of the Good Samaritan. The promise of God is before us. Let's choose life.